There's been so many monster wrestlers in the WWF/WWE that when they debuted you'd think they were a can't-miss prospect. Yet over the decades in WWE there have been far more flops than successes, and some of them are downright baffling as to how these licenses to print money ended up printing their own career obituaries instead. My name's James and this is ListMania Wrestling. There's honestly so many sizable WWE prospects that ended up crashing and burning that this video would actually be something like 5 hours long to get to them all. But the following are 10 of the most notable WWE monster flops, and here is number 1. Number 1, Lars Sullivan, and now let's get to maybe the greatest monster flopperoonie in modern WWE history. Lars Sullivan had the look, 6'3", nearly 300 pounds, thick, ugly, hairy, wide-eyed, awful generic rock music entrance. He had it all. Dylan Miley ran roughshod in NXT under the name Lars Sullivan from May 2017 up to his WWE main roster call-up at the beginning of 2019. The WWE promotion that should have been the ultimate elevation in his career proved to be his ultimate undoing. Lars had a major panic attack and walked out of the arena before WWE Raw went live, and then he disappeared for like 3 months. Upon his return, the shine was already off the apple as Lars attacked Kurt Angle and a few more wrestlers, then almost immediately sustained a severe knee injury that kept him out of the ring for over a year. Aside from his crippling anxiety and being literally crippled by the knee injury, ill-advised actions dug up from Lars Sullivan's past revealed a less than upstanding citizen when he was given a keyboard and an unlimited amount of self-loathing to unburden. Years before, and also while he was signed under a WWE developmental contract, Sullivan disseminated numerous racist, sexist, homophobic, and otherwise offensive posts through multiple accounts on bodybuilding.com. Rather than fire Lars Sullivan outright because WWE still had big plans for him, they fined Lars $100,000 and sent him to sensitivity training. Then while he was rehabbing the knee, it was also discovered he filmed some rather naughty nudie flicks of the homosexual persuasion prior to the beginning of his wrestling career under the name of Mitch Bennett. I mean, filming blue movies kept Chyna out of the WWE Hall of Fame for years because, according to Triple H, kids might Google her name. And not because, it was his ex-girlfriend. But despite the sordid, seedy, and downright moronic details of his past, WWE gave the disgraced Sullivan one more shot in late 2020, where he wrestled a couple more matches for the company. Lars then abruptly quit WWE when he couldn't get a handle of his anxiety issues, saying in 2021 that he was, quote, likely done with professional wrestling, and as of 2025, the walking liability Lars Sullivan has stayed true to that promise. Number 2, Lord Tensai. Now, current WWE NXT head trainer Matt Bloom started his career as the Hirsute Prince Albert, a sort of alternative lifestyle hanger-on with Darren Drozdov in 1999, and then he bounced around the mid to lower mid-card in WWE for a few years. He randomly won the WWF Intercontinental title from Kane a month in 2001, and also received a half-hearted push as A-Train in 2002. A-Train reached the end of the line a couple of years later and was released by WWE in 2004, never reaching his full potential. Pigeonholed as just another big guy, Bloom rehabbed his image in Japan under the name of Giant Bernard, a reference to wrestler Brute Bernard and not, in fact, Beethoven the dog. Yet somehow, it's still a worse moniker than being named after a cock piercing. Success in Japan led to WWE Talent Relations VP Johnny Ace rehiring Bloom in 2012 with a brand new Oriental flavour look. Bloom re-debuted as Lord Tensai, bringing some Japanese influences and stick-on kanji tattoos for his enormous dome to WWE. Fans immediately started chanting Albert, despite the fact that he had deftly concealed his previous identity by getting a full body wax and looking disturbingly shiny. Spitting green mist on his hand because in wrestling green mist irritates the eyes, before applying an iron claw and gaining a win over John Cena wasn't enough to stop fans from not giving a rat's ass, and the push was over as soon as it began. Tensai started losing clean to the middle of the card acts before going where most failed monster heels go to die at the time, in a tag team with Santino Marella. Tensai would then go on to be paired up with Brodus Clay and the Funkadactyls to become the fourth most popular member of Tons of Funk, but not before Tensai was bunged into women's lingerie and forced to dance to complete the humiliation. Number 3, Nathan Jones, the Colossus of Boggo Road, a very crappy name for a very real prison that he allegedly served 10 years in. Nathan Jones was given a mammoth opportunity to make an impact in WWE in 2002. The debut vignettes of Nathan Jones, who was portraying a psychopath, soon-to-be-released jailbird, biding his time until his WWE debut where he could legally hurt people, aka the Y2K nails, were absolutely fantastic. It's just a shame that Nathan Jones' in-ring work couldn't live up to the lofty expectations set by the vignettes in any way. Jones had almost zero wrestling experience, save for a handful of independent appearances when WWE signed him. To accelerate his development, Nathan would be put on numerous WWE dark matches and house shows for months on end, but Jones could not, or would not, improve. Nathan Jones' real problem was that he was too big and too tall and too menacing looking for Vince McMahon to be patient with, and McMahon couldn't help but blow his creative load, so to speak, on the first thrust. To add clarification, professional wrestling is hard to pull off even semi-convincingly, and very few wrestlers grasp the basics of putting a match together, throw convincing looking strikes, manipulate the crowd, etc., without hundreds, if not thousands of matches worth of experience. Conversely, Nathan had probably less than 100 matches before debuting on WWE television. By the time he debuted on television, the menacing former Boggo Road inmate was now a babyface for no discernible reason actually. Jones was actually supposed to make his in-ring debut on live pay-per-view at WrestleMania 19, WWE's annual most important show of the year, tagging up with all-time wrestling legend The Undertaker against the colossal tandem of The Big Show and A-Train. Jones, however, was still so horrible in the ring that WWE officials lost all confidence in him and refused to let him perform in front of the cameras. At the last second, Nathan was written out of the match when he was attacked by the FBI backstage just minutes before bell time. At least Jones was trusted enough to save The Undertaker by making a run-in for the finish so he could perform the one move he could execute, a spinning roundhouse kick. Then he nearly fell over, of course, giving A-Train a big boot, the most achingly simple strike for anybody who has working limbs and doesn't have vertigo. And in that second, it became obvious why Nathan couldn't be trusted to do anything that required even a semblance of coordination. Despite a commanding physical presence, Nathan moved awkwardly. He executed little at an even adequate level and never improved. His generic faux MMA fighter outfit they bunged Nathan in didn't help his cause either, and the Colossus quickly became a burden and an afterthought. By the end of the same year he debuted, Jones quit WWE, citing the hectic travel schedule, and opted to stay in Australia where WWE were touring at the time. Jones would go on to do bit part acting in some pretty major movies, a venture that would prove to be far more suited to his talents in the long run. Number 4, and Brakkus remains the absolute epitome of a roided up wrestler wannabe that Vince McMahon got a big sticky woody over. Despite being so blindingly obviously incompetent, he was only allowed to wrestle on WWF television one single time. It didn't matter how much personal tuition Brakkus received, or what feeder territories he was farmed out to like USWA or ECW, or even how much Dr. Tom Pritchard handheld him through WWF dark matches. Brakkus always displayed the most unfathomable incompetence. Former bodybuilder legend Akim Albrecht was one of the original in-house WWF trainees back in 1996, along with Dwayne Johnson aka The Rock, and the world's strongest man, Mark Henry. But unlike the other two, Brakkus was so brittle that he had to take slams and other assorted bumps on a mattress instead of a ring canvas. Not a problem in the Waterbed Wrestling Federation, but a big problem in the World Wrestling Federation. And also, unlike The Rock and Mark Henry, Brakkus never improved. He couldn't sell, he couldn't move properly, and worst of all, his offence looked like shit and hurt. WSI Network's own Dutch Mantel nominated Brakkus as the worst wrestler he ever shared a ring with, claiming he nearly tapped out just from Brakkus' supposedly fake punches he kept landing on him.
The stiffest bastard I've ever been in the ring with. I mean, he locked up. He was like granite.
But that didn't stop Vince McMahon from airing weeks of vignettes on the WWF's flagship weekly show, Raw is War, in late 97, where in his brusque, aggressive, "My name is Brakkus" delivery in his Mutterzunge, The lowering German challenged the likes of Vader and the Nation of Domination and other heels, despite coming off as a heel himself. So 1997 came and went with no sign of the WWF's answer to Das Wunderkid, and 1998 was looking the same way until Brakkus was randomly entered into the Brawl for All, WWF's shoot boxing cum takedown tournament that nobody could agree on the scoring system for. While it's asinine to even attempt to explain why WWF head writer at the time Vince Russo thought it was a good idea to have legitimate tough man contests with mostly untrained pro wrestlers wedged in a card of otherwise fake matches, just know this: the Brawl for All legitimately injured far more participants, at least 6, than it made stars of. 0. Brakkus was one of those legitimately hurt through the tournament, and to make things worse, he didn't even win his fight, as Puerto Rican tough guy Savio Vega would knock him around the ring for 3 rounds, while Brakkus was left breathing out of his arse. Maybe if Brakkus threw some fake punches at Savio Vega instead of the real ones, he might have stood a chance. Brakkus would gain a measure of revenge when he defeated Savio Vega's Los Boricuas stablemate Jesus Castillo in 50 seconds a month later on WWF Raw is War in his only nationally televised wrestling match. Then Brakkus was fired, and his name was never ever brought up again until this very video. Number 5, the Mega Man himself, Tom McGee. Even more so than Brakkus, former powerlifter and strongman Tom McGee might be the archetypal big guy who had the body, the face, the hair, the height, the athletic ability, and Vince McMahon's seal of approval, and still managed to shit the bed worse than Amber Heard during a marital dispute. Tom McGee had literally one good match in his entire life, and that was his WWF tryout match with Bret Hitman Hart in 1986. Aside from arguably being the best all-round wrestler there ever will be, Bret Hart's greatest strength was idiot-proofing matches, a simple concept that so few wrestlers can actually pull off convincingly. So Bret lets Tom do all his big moves, the backflips and the cartwheels and so on, all while Bret Hart flies around like a pinball for a guy who had not earned that privilege, before allowing McGee to roll him up for the pinfall. The crowd and Vince McMahon go wild, and McMahon during the peak of Hulkamania loudly declares McGee to be his next WWF champion in front of all the boys. So what went wrong? Well, after that first match, Tom McGee didn't have a Bret Hart to handhold him anymore. Instead, McGee worked the house show loop with WWF jobbers like Terry Gibbs, Jose Luis Rivera, Tiger Chung Lee, and other perennial Federation losers who had no interest in making McGee look good. Tom remained on the untelevised house show loop for 6 months, which included a win over, of all people, Don Morocco, before he was sent elsewhere for more seasoning. After a quick Canadian tour the next year, McGee was shuffled off to the land of the rising sun, where he stunk up All Japan rings for a couple of months before 3, count them 3, more WWF house show runs, a total of 5 separate spells in the WWF in 4 years for those keeping score, where McGee wrestled and in some cases lost to preliminary wrestlers like Tim Horner and Jim Powers, lest you forget how far Tom McGee's WWF stock had fallen in just 2 years. McGee would have one televised WWF bout ever, which aired only for the Boston market. Vince McMahon tried everything to get Tom television ready, even turning him heel and pairing him with Jimmy Hart. Nothing they tried worked, and as the old saying goes, you can't polish a turd, even if said turd can do backflips off the top rope. Number 6, Awesome Kong. One of the most intimidating, most impressive, most popular women wrestlers ever, Awesome Kong, along with fellow women's wrestling legend Gail Kim, set viewership records in TNA wrestling with their years-long feud back in the late 2000s. But within weeks of Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff being brought in to take over TNA's creative direction in January 2010, Kong got into a backstage scuffle where she beat up Hogan's then best friend, radio DJ and cuckold, Bubba the Love Sponge. Shortly after requesting her release due to conflicts in management and TNA paying her like crap, Awesome Kong left TNA and signed with the WWE. Kong, now known as Kharma, was introduced to WWE audiences in April 2011 via a series of vignettes featuring Kong popping off a doll's head to ominous horror film music, in a sort of weird precursor actually to what Bray Wyatt's vignettes would become later down the line. A strong start to what would be a ridiculously short, disastrous run. After several weeks where Kharma would interfere and attack other WWE divas, she once again interrupted a tag team match on WWE Raw, only to start crying instead. The next week, an out-of-character Kharma revealed in an in-ring promo that she was pregnant and she obviously couldn't wrestle. Out of sight, out of mind. The Kharma character lasted only a few weeks before being forgotten completely. Kia Stevens, who played Kharma, never had the baby as she would tragically suffer a miscarriage. When it came time to return to WWE, Kharma did so in her only official bout with the company in the men's WWE Royal Rumble match, eliminating Hanico before being thrown out by Dolph Ziggler. WWE apparently still had big plans for her, but by Kia's own admission, she was not in shape and not in the right headspace either, and Kharma was released 6 months after her lone in-ring appearance. Reverting back to either awesome or amazing Kong depending on the company, Kia had one return run in TNA in 2015 and a suspiciously short stint in the early days of Tony Khan's fledgling AEW promotion before becoming one of the few talents the overly charitable Tony Khan outright fired in 2020. Kong was sadly 2 years too early to truly take advantage of WWE's women's revolution as, at her peak, Kia was light years ahead of other modern monsters such as Nia Jax and could easily have been the top drawing heel in women's wrestling today. Number 7, Heidenreich, and that's right, the man that bench pressing forgot the otherwise impressively proportioned John Heidenreich for all intents and purposes was a nice guy, and that's sort of where the compliments end. Heidenreich was not only a terrible wrestler who constantly injured his opponents, he had this weird indefinable look to him that just didn't resonate whatsoever with the fans. Maybe it was the tiny trunks, maybe he borrowed them from Ahmed Johnson, paired with giant MMA gloves. Beyond a total lack of wrestling instincts and an ability to connect with the WWE audience, Heidenreich was also sort of handed an unbroken run of preposterously awful creative ideas he was then forced to execute on television. Originally pitched to debut as a thawed out Nazi who had been cryogenically frozen, that was a pitch. Heidenreich actually made his on-screen WWE debut in late 2003, sans extreme political ideologies, but instead as a giant loser desperately trying to hand his audition tape backstage to people like Steve Austin and Matt Hardy, claiming the tape was made by someone called Little Johnny. The groundbreaking Little Johnny story arc never actually got to the point of explaining who Little Johnny was, as the angle was dropped and Heidenreich settled into the lower mid-card, mostly appearing on WWE B show WWE Heat. Then he was sent back down to WWE's feeder system OVW for retooling. Heidenreich returned to the WWE in late 2004 as an unhinged maniac, not too dissimilar really to his actual personality, in the vain hope of becoming The Undertaker's next monster rival. Not only in size, of course, but at the box office as well. That, of course, didn't happen, despite the all-time great manager Paul Heyman himself managing Big Bad John to numerous defeats at the hands of the Dead Man. Aside from losing to The Undertaker, Heidenreich also started attacking announcers, most memorably Michael Cole, who he kidnapped, took backstage, pinned against a wall, and then read him a threatening poem, while apparently bumming him on national television. More poetry and more horrendous matches later, Heidenreich was then eventually paired with an over-the-hill road warrior Animal to reform the all-time legendary tag team, the Legion of Doom, in place of original member Hawk, who had died 2 years earlier. Not coincidentally, Animal's real-life brother John Laurinaitis was WWE's head of talent relations at the time, and a Legion of Doom documentary just so happened to be being produced by the company. So what better way to plug the DVD by desecrating the legacy of the once seminal tag team by inserting Heidenreich into the lore? Apparently this was all Stephanie McMahon's idea, and longtime fans for the most part hated it. Despite winning the WWE tag team titles, and Animal literally telling Heidenreich which moves and poses to do during the matches, Heidenreich was no Hawk in any sense, and nothing WWE asked of him was working out. But Heidenreich's exit from WWE was even more bizarre, if you can imagine it. In early 2006, John Heidenreich crashed his car while driving in the snow in upstate New York. Instead of calling for help, he decided to sleep in his car instead, give himself pneumonia, or something to that effect, and was shuttled off to hospital by a passing state trooper. So when WWE producers Fit Finlay and Ricky Steamboat went to pick him up from the hospital, John refused to leave despite doctors clearing him, saying that he was just enjoying the food too much. When you would rather eat hospital food than go to work, you know you've had a complete mental breakdown, which is evidently what John had just suffered. Heidenreich was subsequently fired by the WWE for no showing the events he was booked on, and John was never to be seen or referenced by the company ever again. Number 8, Sean O'Haire, a monster of a man, although not a giant in wrestling terms. He was billed at 6'6", 270 pounds, and he was cut to shreds. Sean O'Haire was an unpredictable, explosive badass whose Swanton bomb finisher was somehow prettier than Jeff Hardy's Swanton bomb finisher, the move's originator. He had a lot of physical gifts, and Sean O'Haire was one of the few late WCW prospects who actually seemed to have a future when the company shut down. But his WCW and early WWF Invasion runs exposed how bland, characterless and inexperienced he was, and O'Haire would soon be sent down to OVW for seasoning and repackaging. And boy, what a repackage he got. 2003 had some great introductory vignettes, and O'Haire's might have been the most memorable of that period. A pastiche of Ray Fine's Devil's Advocate character in Stranger Days, Sean strode in front of a blank white background and encouraged the viewer to cheat on their spouse, refuse to pay taxes, spit on the floor, blow off at authority, and be generally antisocial, always ending with his catchphrase,
"I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know."
The new character finally gave O'Haire something tangible for fans to gravitate towards. Sean was almost the anti-Diamond Dallas Positively Page character, but with an early 2000s new metal goatee and unfortunate statically charged hairdo. Fans lapped it up, and there was actual excitement for what he would achieve on the WWE's main roster. But there were major problems. Two of them, in fact. Number one, those pre-tape vignettes were put together from many takes, and in reality Sean was just not much of a live performer, very much a prerequisite in pro wrestling. Number two, Sean was paired with a desperately overweight, middle-aged, deranged, yet still hugely charismatic, rowdy Roddy Piper. It was a terrible fit for Sean because Roddy's presence completely overshadowed O'Haire's. The Devil's Advocate was immediately an afterthought to Piper's unhinged ramblings, and Sean was physically shunted into the background during their televised segments. If drowning in creative purgatory wasn't bad enough, Sean O'Haire would go from working with major money players like Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon to joining the unemployment line thanks to Roddy Piper's big mouth. The Rowdy One gave an infamous interview to HBO with Bryant Gumbel in June 2003, where he exposed his own struggles with addiction and cast light on the raft of prominent wrestling performers who, by 2003 anyway, were seemingly dropping dead every other day. Piper also blamed promoters, i.e. Vince McMahon, for not doing anything to stem the tide. Piper was immediately fired by WWE, and Sean O'Haire's push evaporated. O'Haire spent his remaining time on the WWE roster wrestling on B-Show WWE Velocity, before a motorcycle crash saw him sent back to OVW. He was let go a couple of months later, and that was the last of Sean O'Haire in WWE. But hey, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Number 9, and it's Mordecai, better known for his later but just as mediocre run as Lost Boys style blood-sucking vampire Kevin Thorne in 2006. Kevin Furtig's first main roster WWE run occurred in 2004, playing the role of Mordecai, a religious zealot acting as a vengeful messenger on behalf of a wrathful, unnamed deity. Dressed all in white and carrying around a lightly modified crucifix, Mordecai had the full backing of the WWE machine, with weeks of introductory vignettes broadcast showing Mordecai praying at an altar and claiming that the time of reckoning was upon us. Immediately to the fans, Mordecai appeared to be the anti-Undertaker, almost a photographic negative as you were, and surely a clash between the two was on the cards down the line. The Undertaker himself was even a fan of Kevin Furtig's work, and the stars were aligning for a major clash between good and evil. Kevin even dyed his hair, including his beard and his eyebrows, bright white, and he wore bright blue contacts to complement his demonic countenance and contrast the Undertaker's all-black wardrobe. Mordecai debuted at the aptly named Judgment Day pay-per-view in 2004 and murdered Scotty 2 Hotty with, what else, a crucifix powerbomb. But already the cracks were starting to show. The main issue with Mordecai was that Kevin took to heart that he was supposed to be the antithesis to the Undertaker's unholy dead man character, which was, kind of strangely, not what WWE were going for, and Mordecai started slowing down his work to appear more methodical. But it got to the point that his matches and mannerisms were so boring that fans and Vince McMahon himself quickly got sick of the Mordecai character. So Kevin Furtig himself also admitted that he'd worked so many tag team matches with Tyson Tomko, where the actual energy expended is pretty much halved, that he wasn't fit enough to put on exciting singles matches beyond a couple of high impact moves before getting winded. Mordecai's entrance was also a little bit budget. Yes, there was, a bit of an explosion when he hit his giant crucifix, or symbol, as I'm sure WWE will prefer me to say, on the entrance ramp, and his music was suitably spooky as well. But if Mordecai was meant to be the converse of The Undertaker, there really needed to be more of a light show, a bespoke camera angles and more impressive all-round production. Then there was the bar fight that Kevin Furtig got involved in with Maven and Sylvester Grenier. Someone tried to attack the WWE guys with a bottle and Furtig broke the guy's nose. Somehow both Furtig and WWE ended up getting sued and the dirtbag wasn't going to settle for cheap. Vince McMahon did not take the news well, and after barely a month on television, Mordecai lost clean to Rey Mysterio on SmackDown before the gimmick was cast aside for good. Furtig was shipped back to OVW, where he was eventually brought back up as Kevin Thorne 2 years later. Number 10, and did you know Luther Reigns actually made his nationally televised wrestling debut battling and losing to Rowdy Roddy Piper on WCW Nitro? Did you care? The answer to at least one of those questions is of course no, and that's the story of Luther Reigns' wrestling career. Another gassed up, pre-wellness policy muscle Mary who looked like the bouncer on the front door who behaves like he owns the nightclub. Devoid of charisma and personality, Luther bored WWE audiences into a coma for 2 years with his antics, whatever they were, of course, despite a continual push working with all-time WWE legends like Kurt Angle, The Undertaker, and John Bradshaw Layfield. For those who weren't around back then, 2004 was a dark, depressing period to be watching WWE SmackDown. WWE split their roster in twain, and wrestlers now performed exclusively on either Raw or SmackDown, so there were plenty of spots to fill on the blue brand, and of course, Vince McMahon liked burly boys in tight trunks. Cue Luther Reigns, Orlando Jordan, Mark Jindrak, the Basham Brothers, Kenzo Suzuki, Heidenreich, A-Train, and other unrelatable, magnetism-free deadbeats who only found gainful employment because 2/3 of the actual money-drawing WWE superstars quit or were fired from the company back in 2002. Despite numerous matches with WWE Hall of Famers, we'll guarantee you'll remember Luther Reigns for that one single segment. That Thanksgiving promo. Big Show is hosting a banquet in the middle of the ring, in the middle of SmackDown of course. The commentators and a couple of the production crew start filling their plates, when lo and behold, Luther Reigns' Muzak kicks in. And the square-headed oaf strides into view to intense disinterest, not only from the audience, but from the players in the ring. It's one thing for the then-retired suplex machine Taz to no-sell Luther Reigns' presence, but when demure ring announcer Tony Chimmel rolls his eyes while reaching for another spoonful of creamy mash, you know your aura is in the negative numbers. Luther Reigns yells too hard into the microphone and peaks the levels, saying he hates Thanksgiving because it reminds him of being in prison 23 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then he demands to be served food, including cheese souffle and peas. Why peas? Because
I had peas before.
It's nice that within his 1 free hour per day at prison, he found the time to expand his palate. So the Big Show dispatches Roman's illegitimate brother, with a whole chicken no less, that also refused to work with Luther Reigns and disintegrated in Show's hand. And with that segment, whatchamacallit's unmemorable run as a WWE superstar's legacy was cemented. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to give it a like and write in the comments who you want to hear about for the next installments, and please also subscribe to this channel if you'd be so good so you don't miss the next video, and I'll see you for the next one.